So, today we're still in the book of Acts, and our Acts series is almost wrapped up. Next week's going to be our last one in the book of Acts. We're skipping over a lot of stuff, obviously. Acts has way too many stories. We could be in here forever, but I don't want anybody to get bored just going through Acts stories. And so maybe we'll come back to more Acts stuff some other time, but for now, we're going to take a big old jump, because last week we were in Acts chapter 10. This week we're in Acts chapter 17. So, basically seven chapters that we're skipping over, because we're going to be in the second half of Acts 17. So let's catch up for between then and now. So if you remember from Acts chapter 10 last week, we talked about the story of Peter and Cornelius, and how suddenly the floodgates were open, right? God revealed to Peter that the Gentiles were okay to be converted to Christianity, that it wasn't, it wasn't just for the Jews anymore. And since then, up to now in Acts 17, Saul, who 2 weeks ago we talked about his conversion, he's now called Paul, and ever since that conversion, he's been traveling around. He's been on several missionary journeys, going around the old ancient Roman Empire, teaching, preaching. He's converting lots of people, Jews and Greeks and Romans and everybody, to Christianity. He's setting up churches in major cities, including Ephesus and Corinth and places like that. And back in Jerusalem, the leaders, the apostles and a few others of the church came together, and they agreed that Gentiles did not have to become Jews before becoming Christians, right? They sort of made this grand proclamation that the only requirements were to abstain from sexual immorality and abstain from food sacrificed to idols. And that was it. That was in Acts 15. And then Paul continues on his journeys. We go back to following Paul. And he's bouncing around from different place. And then immediately before our passage tonight, he's run out of town in 2 different cities. He gets run out of town in one city, goes to another city, Berea, where he's welcomed. And then the people from the first city come and they chase him out and they send him on. And so the people around Paul tell him to go wait in Athens, a little bit of a ways away from where he's been. Just go hang out there until everything boils over and he can come back. So he's waiting in Athens, and we find Paul in Athens, and that's where we're going to pick up in Acts chapter 17, verse 16. So let me read a section of this for us. While Paul was waiting for them in Athens, he was greatly distressed to see that the city was full of idols. So he reasoned in the synagogue with both Jews and God-fearing Greeks, as well as in the marketplace, day by day with those who happened to be there. A group of Epicurean and Stoic philosophers began to debate with him. Some of them asked, "What is this babbler trying to say?" Others remarked, "He seems to be advocating foreign gods." They said this because Paul was preaching the good news about Jesus and the resurrection. Then they took him and brought him to a meeting of the Areopagus, where they said to him, "May we know what this new teaching is that you're presenting? You're bringing some strange ideas to our ears, and we would like to know what they mean." All the Athenians and the foreigners who lived there spent their time doing nothing but talking about and listening to the latest ideas. I'm going to pause there for a second. We'll keep going with the story. But Athens, a city full of gods, but not God. The people are, in case anybody missed the last 2,000 years of civilization, the Greeks are where philosophy happened. It's where all the people, and the book of Acts tells us this, the Athenians, they're constantly talking about new ideas. We're introduced to Epicureans and Stoics, which are just 2 of 5 or 6 major philosophical schools in Athens that came out of Athenian people in the ages before Jesus and Paul. And so you've got this just environment of all these people thinking and talking about new ideas, and also just tons of religion. I mean, I was going to show pictures tonight, but our slides aren't working. There's if you go to Athens, there's just temples everywhere. Walk down the street and you kick over a stone that used to be a temple to some god in the Greek pantheon. And of course, there's the Parthenon and the Acropolis, the big hill where there was tons of temples and stuff like that. So it's a really spiritual place. It's a place where lots of ideas are flowing. And Paul comes into this and starts to present something that was, brand new to them somehow. Out of all the ideas that they'd heard, they hadn't heard this one before. And I think as we get started with reading about this story tonight, Athens is a pretty good stand-in for our culture, for the people around us. Because we have a lot of people who are spiritual today, right? Spirituality is big, but there's a lot of options, and there's not like, it's not expected that you're going to follow this one path. There's a lot of open ideas. A lot of people are discussing, lots of different ideas all the time, and with social media, we can chat about ideas all across the world quicker than ever. Ideas can spread. New technology can spread quickly. We're a culture that is fascinated with the new and the novel, right? Not like novels reading, but a novel idea, right? That's what fascinates us. That's where our culture is always headed, is what's the newest thing, what's the latest thing. And there's starting to be a little bit of a blowback to that, but that's still, in a big way, what our culture is like. And Paul addresses the Athenians, who are very similar in a lot of ways to that. So I think the way that he talks to them can give us some clues about how we can address our culture. So let me carry on just for another paragraph here. Paul stood up in the meeting of the Areopagus, and he said, "People of Athens, I see that in every way you are very religious. For as I walked around and looked carefully at your objects of worship, I even found an altar with this inscription, 'To an unknown God.' So you are ignorant of the very thing you worship. And this is what I am going to proclaim to you." All right, so before I get into Paul's sermon, I'm going to pause there. And I'm actually going to bring this out because I really want you guys to see this picture. Because I think it's a very ironic statement, what Peter or what Paul is saying here. Let's see. So I'm going to pass this around. I trust you guys with my computer. This is me standing on the Areopagus. And you can see behind you what's right behind, and we'll pass it around, but right in the background of the Areopagus, like as Paul is speaking, he says, "I see that you are a very religious people," as the Parthenon sits behind him, as the Acropolis with all these temples is literally right behind him. So it's kind of it's like a no duh. These are a very religious people, So he's got this full view of the Acropolis there as he's saying all of these things. And he's saying to them, look, I get that you're religious. Like, you guys have these religions, and there's temples everywhere. You walk up onto the mountain, not the Areopagus, but the Acropolis, and you walk up it, and there's we all know the Parthenon, right? But there's 20, 30 temple complexes. Robert, Alex, do you guys remember, did we ever get a count of how many temples there were? No, but there was a lot. There's a lot of temples on this mountain. And again, it's not just up there. It's all over the place in the city. And so you've got all these religions, and it turns out that one of them is to an unknown God. So there's what's probably happening here is that this is in reference to what's known as a mystery cult or a mystery religion. And the mystery cults emphasized secrecy, they emphasized sort of initiation rites for people who would join them, and they promised rebirth and a new life. But again, they were mystery cults, so only those who were initiated, only those who made it to the furthest levels knew who the god was. And in a lot of cases, we don't know which gods were being... There were many mystery cults throughout Greece at the time, and we don't know which gods each of these cults were worshiping, if any. Cult, by the way, I'm not talking about cult in the way, these people weren't doing crazy things. It was just, a specific religion, a very, very limited religion. So mystery religion, mystery cult, both words work. Anyway, in some ways, these mystery cults are really close to Christianity, and in other ways, they're way off, right? The talk about rebirth is really close to Christianity. Some of these ideas of initiation, right? We have baptism and things like that are initiatory rites. And in the early church, it was even a little bit more you usually couldn't participate in communion or the Eucharist unless you'd been baptized, you'd been in the church for a little while. So it was a little bit closer even to these mystery religions, but not the same. It's a resemblance. And so Paul takes that little resemblance, and now he's going to build off of that. He's going to say, this to the unknown God, right? You guys have these cults or these religions where you worship a God you don't even know. Let me tell you about that God. Let me break open the secrets. Let me get right to the heart of it, right? Show you that I'm an initiate. I know what I'm talking about. So here's his sermon to them. The God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth and does not live in temples built by human hands. And he's not served by human hands as if he needed anything. Rather, he himself gives everyone life and breath and everything else. From one man he made all the nations, that they should inhabit the whole earth. And he marked out their appointed times in history and the boundaries of their lands. God did this so that they would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he is not far from any one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being. As some of your own poets have said, we are his offspring. Therefore, since we are God's offspring, we should not think that the divine being is like gold or silver or stone, an image made by human design and skill. In the past, God overlooked such ignorance, but now he commands all people everywhere to repent. For he has set a day when he will judge the world with justice by the man he has appointed. He has given proof of this to everyone by raising him from the dead. So now in Paul's sermon, we've got kind of a duality happening here. Both a reaching out to the culture by using things that they understand, and a rejection of the parts of it that go against the scripture and the gospel. And so on the one hand, Paul, obviously, he's using the idea of the mystery cult, as we already said, and he's also quoting Greek philosophers. There's two phrases in there near the end of the first paragraph of that. For in him we live and move and have our being. And then, we are his offspring. And those are both direct quotes from Greek philosophers talking about God. Not like Plato, but, Greek philosophers of that time who were known, but not as known to us today. But he's quoting these philosophers and basically showing, like, hey, I'm part of this, I understand this culture, I get it, right? I'm up on the new ideas, I'm not just some crazy, backwater Palestinian, right? I know my philosophy. I know what I'm talking about. And then on the other hand, he attacks idolatry. He goes right to the heart of the biggest issue that the Athenians face, which isn't their philosophy, but their idolatry, all the worshiping of other gods that they're doing. And the very fact that they erect these statues and these temples rather than worshiping God because God can provide for them, not the other way around. So these Athenians who are very proud of their religious ways, and that Acropolis dominates Athenian life, he goes right to the heart of that and says, God doesn't need a house. God doesn't need you to bring him food, right? God's the one who holds everything together. He's keeping you alive. You don't need to protect or keep alive the gods in a house. So he's doing both of these things. He's relating to the culture and he's rejecting and not attacking, but trying to correct and acknowledge the parts where it needs to change. And so, again, I want to do a little cultural analysis of our own. And I don't think that, obviously, today's temples, today's idols are not big temples on a hill, big statues, things like that. Our idols are a little subtler. But I think our idols are our ego, our independence, the freedom to do what we want. Those ideas that sort of we cling to, our selfhood, our independence that we just can't let go of. And I think as a culture, I'm not necessarily pointing to anybody here, but as a culture, our ego, our selfness, our self-centeredness is our big idol. One of them, anyway. But on the other hand, we have relatable ideas too, right? There's a deep longing for spiritual wholeness in our world today. Everybody, like I said earlier, there's a culture of just spirituality and people who are seeking something to fulfill them. There's also a lot of altruism and concern for others. I mean, people are out there trying to make a change and do good things. So you've got issues, you've got idols that are worth addressing, that you also have things that are relatable, ideas that we can come and connect with. I think it's important, let me close with the last few verses of this section of Paul in Athens. When they heard about the resurrection of the dead, some of them sneered, but others said, "We want to hear you again on this subject." At that, Paul left the council. Some of the people became followers of Paul and believed. Among them was Dionysius, a member of the Areopagus, also a woman named Damaris, and a number of others. not everybody believed, right? Paul didn't get up there and preach this message and suddenly there were tons of converts. In some cities that Paul goes to, we hear of, massive conversions, and they open these big churches and lots of work is done. This is a few people, right? We get 2 names. I don't know if it was just 2 of them, but there weren't a ton of people who converted. In fact, a good number of them just left. They were curious. Some of them are sneering about it. They're making fun of Paul. Some of them want to hear more. They're not convinced yet. And I think that is going to be true of us today too. We're not in a cultural moment that's ripe for tons of people just all of a sudden, snap like that, going to come back to church. We're not fortunate enough to be in that moment, I don't think. Instead, I think we have the responsibility to preach the gospel and know that there's going to be a few people who will respond. There's going to be a few people who sneer no matter what. And there's going to be more people who want to know more and maybe at a later time are going to be interested in knowing more. But we need to look around. We need to take stock of our culture. We need to take a moment and realize that it's our responsibility, like Paul, our joy as well, not just responsibility, to reach out to our American culture, to your culture in your workplace. We all live in a vast kind of crisscrossing cultures, right? Not just the big one, but your church, your work, your home, your friends, your school, if you're going to school. All of those things are individual cultures as well as the big culture. And so we need to look for ways to relate the good things to the gospel and address the places where the gospel needs to come and correct those things. So with that, let's spend some time in prayer with one another.